Madoka Kuya is a washed-up photographer with no hope for his career. Ever since an incident where he took the picture of a young girl being swallowed by a tsunami, he hasn't been the same. Until one day he meets an F4 racer, Asahina Haruka, whom he is finally able to take a picture of. Kuya got his drive back and decided to help sponsor Kamawaki Motors, which Haruka was racing for. The photographer was all talk and very broke. Despite that, they both worked together to eliminate their rivals on the racetracks and find their way to the #1 position. Haruka would eventually have to overcome the issue of his tires wearing out during a race in order to secure his position on the winner's podium. Kuya is getting chewed out by his ex-wife, Saiko, because he's a lazy and incompetent fool who has made them go late for an event. We see a quick flashback where she gives him some materials to go through, and she tells him that they'll be covering a motorsport event. Saika helps him get jobs, and she works as an editor. Kuya, on the other hand, never fails to do something stupid after she stresses herself out to get him a job. Maybe that's why she even left in the first place. Back to the present, Saiko drops him off and tells him to do his best. Kuya comes up to the racetracks and gets some pictures of a car blazing through the place. He sees a racer getting interviewed and tries to take a picture, but suddenly stops like he has a bad vision. After that, he stumbles upon the car park of the F4 racers. He sees Haruka and his mechanic, Kotaro, pulling their car to their stand, but he doesn't really know who they are yet. At that point, he was wondering why Kotaro was a complete nuisance to the world around him. A man named Ina then calls out to him. Kuya finds out that Ina owns a racing team known as Belsariso. For the first time in his life, he saw really cool and shiny cars, which were nothing like the raggedy car that Saiko drives. Ina then introduces him to Harunaga, his #1 driver, and Tokumaru, his #2 driver. He's training Harunaga so that he can reach F3 or F2 racing someday. After that, Ina asks Tokumaru to show Kuya around the paddock. While showing him around, Tokumaru explains what licenses are needed to be a racer. Aside from licenses, money is mostly needed, and while some are able to cough up the dough, the rest can barely afford it, but still decide to race for the passion. The latter group are the stupid ones who have no form of money management in their lives. They come across Haruka's stand, and Kuya has to stop Tokumaru from getting into a fight with the young driver. Kuya wishes Haruka good luck in his race, but the young boy thinks he's a god who doesn't need to be cheered on. Later on, Futoshi, the owner of Kamaki Motors, which Haruka races for, comes to meet Kuya, who's lost in thought. He gives the photographer a credentials pass, which makes him a temporary member of their team. Futoshi shows Kuya around the track and explains the racing procedures. After that, he introduces Kotaro as his son. The race kicks off, and not long after, a yellow flag is shown to the racers to warn them about something dangerous on the track. Haruka was doing well in the race, and Kuya finally got the drive to cheer him on. At that moment, Haruka's car burst a tire. And he was out of the race. So much for not needing to be cheered on. After the race, Kuya takes a picture of Haruka as the boy cries his heart out. He shows everyone the photo he took of Haruka while he was crying. Haruka sees the picture as soon as he walks into the place, and he nearly smashes the camera. I'm surprised they expected him to like that kind of picture. I see why they've never won a race. After that, Kuya heads to the garage with Haruka and talks with him. While talking, Kuya reveals how broke and poor he is, which makes Haruka wonder why someone like that wants to sponsor them. You'd think he'd have the money to back up his words. Haruka lets him know how much they spend on equipment for a year, which makes Kuya question his decisions about the sponsorship. After their conversation, Futoshi sits with Kuya and tells him how Haruka's mom passed and his dad died during a race. After living with relatives for a while, young Haruka decided he wanted to kick the bucket just like his dad, so he became a racer. On his way back, Kuya gets a call from Saiko, who's offering him another job opportunity, and the client is Ina, who owns Belsariso. He immediately accepts the job because he really has no choice. I wonder how he even puts up with himself. The next day, he meets up with Ina, who nearly drives him to an early grave in a sports car. When you're broke, going fast will definitely seem like you could die at any time. Kuya gets to work as soon as they arrive. Ina lets him know how much his team spends a year on their equipment, and he even calls it cheap. To Kuya, it was a dream that he most likely would never live. He should start by paying for his camera first. Kuya returns to Futoshi with a list of potential sponsors and shows it to his team. Unfortunately, none of them proceeded with the sponsorship since Haruka always comes in last. After that horrible display, Kuya comes to apologize to Haruka back at their office. He decides to take his time and look for a good sponsor for them. Hopefully, he doesn't embarrass them any further. Not a minute later, Kuya comes up with a plan for them to take small loans and advertise company logos on their race cars and uniforms. So much for taking his time with the process. He takes Haruka and heads out to find people who would be interested. They only end up getting treats and snacks, but no one runs their ads with them. In the evening, they meet a young kid who cheers them up and boosts their spirits to try and finish in first place in the next race. The kid gives them a sticker, and that's how they got their first sponsor. After beating time and making a new record, Haruka was wondering how Kuya was able to get a sponsor. A media team then shows up to shoot a commercial with Haruka. I knew that the foolish Kuya couldn't possibly get a sponsor on reasonable terms. It was only possible because Kuya showed them the picture of Haruka crying. Thanks to the new tires, Kotaro and Futoshi were able to get Haruka to proceed with the commercial. If only it were just a normal commercial. Why did they have the young driver do sit-ups for it? At the same time, Kuya was still doubting himself with the camera and just wanted the professionals to handle everything. The media team started asking Haruka some personal questions about what inspired him to start racing. It became a bit too difficult for him to answer, considering how his dad ended up while racing. The scene then shifts to Haruga and Tokumaru, who are also being interviewed. Tokumaru was trying his best to be calm while dealing with the stupid teammate he had as the first driver. Haruga was about to tell Alice why Tokumaru became the second driver, but he quickly got shushed. Hopefully Tokumaru doesn't kill this guy during a race. He's a lot to deal with. The next day, Tokumaru requested to be the lead driver in the next race. Ina agrees, but only on the condition that Tokumaru can seize the lead in 20 minutes. If not, he would have to hand over the lead driver position back to Harunaga. Tokumaru didn't take those conditions well. He went to the bathroom and started throwing a tantrum, even blaming Haruka, who had just walked in. Rather than looking for excuses, how about he tries to be a good driver and not a useless wimp? Back at the racetracks, the action kicks off. Tokumaru is leading Harunaga well, while Haruka is slowly catching up. The clock is beating fast, and it's just a matter of time until Tokumaru's 20-minute window is up. The signal comes for him to drop off, but he decides to be stubborn, which leads to him sliding off the tracks. He was a fool before, but this just makes him an even greater fool. Seeing that Haruka was about to pass him, Tokumaru rushed back to the tracks to prevent that from happening. The final lap came, and they were both going at it head-to-head. Haruka used the slipstream technique to beat Tokumaru. And he came in fourth place. It's not the top three, which means he's still as useless as he's ever been. After the race, Haruka told Koya that his other reason for racing was to reach the top 3 podiums, just like his dad once did. The Komaki Motors members celebrated while Tokumaru cursed himself for losing. Haruka goes to his family's grave to pray and let their spirits know how things have been going for him. On a normal day, you'd think someone speaking to a grave would be admitted as a psychiatric patient. After that, Haruka and Kouya went to a show to look at the commercial shoot of their sponsor. The company was advertising a new soda drink, and the clips were really nice. Until they showed the picture of Haruka crying. Kouya's enemies were definitely after him because that picture wasn't even necessary for the commercial. Haruka might as well end the man right there. Kouya tried cheering him up, but he was just blabbing and somehow hurt Haruka's feelings by calling him a loser repeatedly. After that, Haruka heads to school with Alice and Kotaro. Alice is their childhood friend, but she decided to go support Belsariso's team instead of her childhood friends. So much for a long-lasting friendship. On their way, they met Harunaga, who came to return Alice's bag. Alice, on the other hand, forgot how to function like a normal human being as soon as she saw the boy. Harunaga then congratulated Haruka on his commercial. If only it stopped there. The The clueless fool started talking about how Haruka cries when he loses. Seriously, Kuya should never be forgiven for such damage. After that, Haruka went for another photo shoot while Kuya was trying to figure out if the boy had blocked him. Later, Kuya gets asked to take some pictures himself for the shoot. He was still battling with some bad memories, so he didn't want to take the pictures. It would have been understandable if he said it, but yelling at the poor people just made him look like a villain. He then ran out like the incompetent fool he was. After that, Saiko came to talk to Haruka. She then told him that 12 years ago, Kuya took a photo of a little girl being swallowed up by a tsunami during an earthquake incident. He got a lot of hate for it and lost himself afterward. Those horrible memories still haunt him, and that's why he hesitates to take pictures of people. After their discussion, Haruka takes Kuya to his family's grave the next day. He tells the photographer how his dad died, and how he blames himself for pushing his dad to that point. Haruka was about to say something cool, but decided to ask for incense. Not only will we never know, but we'll never forgive him for doing that. He then tells his dad that when he stands on the winner's podium, he'll show him the picture that Kuya will take. Kuya looked at him like he was a deranged kid before making the same promise and leaving with him. Futoshi gives Haruka and Kotaru some flyers for an upcoming marathon in the town. Kotaru saw that the grand prize was a huge amount of meat and realized that would be the only reason that his fat dad would be interested in a running competition. Give the skinny kids the work so his fat butt can sit around and feast. Ina also got Harunaga and Tokumaru to participate in the marathon. Poor Alice was stupidly dragged in because she couldn't say no to Harunaga. Later on, Koya finds out that Haruka is also running, and he decides to bring his camera to take pictures and cheer him on. That's if the idiot will actually remember how a camera works when the time comes. The next day, Saeko met up with Koya and Futoshi, while Haruka was trying to drag Kotaru to go and sign up. The second runner was supposed to be Futoshi, but he twisted his ankle after his fat butt decided to go for a morning run. Such a foolish father. The runners went to the starting line to get ready. Harunaga prevented Tokumaru from starting a ruckus with Haruka. I guess once you're a sore loser, you'll always be one. With the sound of the gun, the race started. That's when we see that Futoshi is giving commentary on it. I knew this fool was lying about his injury. Harunaga and Tokumaru were in the lead together, while Haruka tailed them from behind. Kotaru, on the other hand, was being a slowpoke, and Alice only kept up with him for some time before she abandoned him and sped through. He passed out, but his father wasn't about to let his lazy butt drop out of the race like that. Most people had dropped out, and it was just Haruka, Harunaga, and Tokumaru who were still in the lead. The racers tapped out, and got to the water stop, where they would rejuvenate themselves. Kotaru got there and was served dry food and hot tea. The old people of this town were probably after his life. They served everyone the same thing, which made it obvious that this was their first time. What happened to giving out cold water? Getting to the finish line, Harunaga started talking about James Hunt, a driver he looked up to. Suddenly, Haruka fell because the sole of his shoe had worn out. Kuya tossed his shoes to Haruka and cheered him on. Haruka kicked the shoes away and decided to run with his bare feet. That must have broken Koya's heart. Haruka caught up with the other two, who decided to get serious as they approached the finish line. In the end, it was a three-way tie. Haruka gave Futoshi his prize as a birthday gift, and Kuya was finally able to take a picture of the two. Kuya was able to get his motivation back, and he started taking pictures of models. Haruka was doing well and was able to get the 4th position in the qualifying rounds. Kuya motivated Haruka and said he had a feeling that he would make it to the winner's podium. It sounded special until Haruka and Kotaru told him that he'd been saying that during every qualifying round. At this point, they should stop taking this fool seriously. Meanwhile, Tokumaru was telling Harunaga that he would beat the #1 driver someday. Maybe he will, or maybe he'll continue his life as a sore loser. He should work towards beating Haruka first. After that, Futoshi met up with Kuya, who handed back the scrapbook with information and documents related to F4. Kuya then went to look at the video of Haruka's dad's accident when it suddenly started raining, as if it were a bad omen, signifying that something bad was going to happen. He went to the Kamaki Motors tent and asked Futoshi if they wouldn't change to the more sturdy rain tires. But Futoshi said those ones would let up easily. Is this man trying to get this kid killed, like his dad? Haruka came out and said he would stick with the slick tires. Obviously, he has a death wish. The Belsariso team was also going with their slick tires, and this gave Haruka more motivation to stick with him. Are the adults in this show trying to let all the kids die? Is there no one with sense? Kuoya was really worried, and he ended up arguing with Haruka about the tires to use for the race. He didn't even want the boy to go ahead with the race because he feared he might end up like him. Despite Kaoya's words, Haruka still decided to be a dumb boy and stick with the slick tires. The racers got on the tracks, and the race started. The weather also started clearing up, which was a good sign. Everything was looking good until Mother Nature decided she wasn't done, and the rain came back heavier than before. Belsariso was still in front, while Haruka was tailing them. Haruka lost control for a second and slid off, but nothing fatal happened. I guess the Grim Reaper isn't ready for him yet. He continued to speed through but decided to come to a pit stop rather than risk the rest of the race. Thankfully, some common sense finally kicked in for him. Unfortunately, Harunaga got into a nasty crash. Koya was about to take a picture when he saw Harunaga's face. It reminded him of the incident with the little girl who was caught in a tsunami. Because of that, Koya wasn't able to take the picture. Kuya woke up from the same nightmare the next day. Suddenly he gets a call from Sato, who handles the beverage company that's sponsoring Komaki Motors. Meanwhile, Kotaro and Elise were discussing Harunaga's accident. The racer sustained some broken bones, which would prevent him from racing for a while. I guess Tokumaru finally got his chance to be number one. Of course, it's the only way a loser like him could get the spot. Kotaro advised Alice to go and visit Harunaga, since she was so worried. After that, Kotaro and Haruka said that they hadn't heard from Kuya for a while. Futoshi walks in and suddenly gets a call about Mikazuki Beverages canceling their sponsorship. Kuya was at the sponsor's office trying to get Sato not to cancel the sponsorship. One of her assistants walks in and explains that the company has been getting messages concerning the photo he took, which still haunts his memories. In order to preserve their image, Sato had no choice but to proceed with their decision. Basically, they told Koya to get out because he's a good-for-nothing scumbag. Saiko went to meet Futoshi and apologized for the whole thing. The next race day came, but Koya was still nowhere to be found. Tokumaru won the race, and he wasn't giving Haruka any space during it. The dude was really tired of being a washed-up loser. A racer for Belsariso, named Uitani, finished in third place. It seems Haruka went back to his usual losing position as well. Later on, Haruka calls Kotaro to discuss with him about not being able to reach Koya. Seriously, the guy should man up and stop being a wimp. Haruka started crying and blaming himself for not understanding how Kuya really felt. Kotaro slaps him back to his senses and tells him to stop overthinking it. Haruka then went to visit Kuya at his place. At the same time, Alice went to see Harunaga at the hospital. She got there and saw that he was already surrounded by numerous women. I'm sure she realized just how useless and insignificant she was in his life. She noticed that despite Harunaga trying to make a joke about the situation, his hands were shaking, which showed that he was really scared about the future of his career. Ina meets Tokumaru in their office, where he analyzes the race of his fellow teammates. Tokumaru feels he's getting too old for F4 racing and needs his next big break. Ina tells him not to be so uptight, and that he should try advising his fellow teammates as well. Meanwhile, Koya left Haruka outside and wouldn't open the door throughout the day. I thought only children sulked like this. Haruka decided to apologize and thank him through the door, but suddenly found it open. He went inside, but he didn't see Koya or anyone else. Futoshi calls Haruka and says that, according to Saiko, Koya would be away for a while. Saiko also doesn't know where he went. So much for him getting his juice back. Haruka heads back that night, and they tell him that Belsariso wants him to be their second top driver. Futoshi advised him to go ahead with the offer, mostly because the fat man just wanted money. The next day, Haruka went to meet Ina and Tokumaru. They didn't even talk before Ina put him in a car with their uniform and helmet. The man must be really desperate. Maybe Tokumaru isn't as good as he thought. Haruka then heads out to test the tracks with the new race car. Meanwhile, Alice meets Harunaga doing some light workouts in the hospital. Who even allowed the fool to lift weights in a ward? Harunaga was pushing his body because he felt time wasn't on his side anymore. When Haruka finished his test round, Ina and Tokumaru advised him on how to become a faster driver. After that, Ina took him out to a fancy restaurant for dinner. And no, it's not what you think. It's not that kind of taking out. Haruka then found out that Ina used to be his dad's team principal when he passed. Ina used to be a wild guy in his youth, but I guess old age really catches up to you fast. I just didn't expect him to go from blonde hair to black hair. Maybe the ladies didn't find him interesting. Back at the hospital, Harunaga was lamenting about how he would soon be replaced by a new driver. Dude doesn't even know his replacement came very early. Poor guy. Alice tried to cheer him up, and she reminded him about James Hunt and his rival, Niki Lauda, who got back to racing after having a serious accident. Hakura got back and was talking about his fancy dinner. He still wasn't comfortable with Belsoriso and would rather have Kotaru work on his setup. The next day, Haruka continued his practice runs while Kotaru was hurting like his girlfriend just broke up with him. Back to the tracks, Haruka was leading the slipstream, while Tokumaru followed closely behind. It was going well until it became really competitive because Haruka was trying to pass Tokumaru. The so-called #1 driver lost his cool and slipped off the tracks. He then started yelling at Haruka in their car tent. I guess he never lost that sore loser touch. Later at night, Haruka went back to Kuya's house and looked through his photo portfolios. While looking through the album, he found a business card for a tour planner. Haruka tracked Kuya to a supermarket and met him as he was leaving. He lets Kuya know that the man is a useless and careless person who leaves their house open and lets people enter. How do you even travel without locking your door? He then decided to stay with the photographer until he completed whatever it was he needed to do. The next day, Kuya took Haruka to tour the place with him. From having a seafood breakfast, to going on boat rides, to other numerous activities. They were basically just taking a vacation at this point. Maybe Kuya was just trying to get away from the annoying kid. While having ice cream, Haruka asked him if he still thought about taking pictures of people. The idea of it seemed to bring fear to Kuya's face. Kuya suddenly got a call from Kikuchi, and it looked like he still had to wait a bit longer. From there, Haruka decides to go-kart racing with him. Kuya was given a 3-lap head start, but he still lost. Seriously, how incompetent can someone be? Since Kuya lost their bet as well, Haruka told Kuya to take a picture of him. Kuya was holding back, so Haruka asked him to say the real reason for his not being able to take pictures of people. The scene shifts to a period 12 years ago. Kuya was telling Saeko, who was still his wife at the time, that he would be staying longer to take some pictures of the coast and fishermen. After the call, he tries to take a picture of a young girl, but she finds him creepy and disturbing. The girl hides away while a man named Shuzo comes to talk to Kuya. The photographer then shows Shuzo the pictures of people he has taken around town. After that, Shuzo gives his phone to take a picture of him and the young girl named Momo, who's his granddaughter. Together, the three of them take a selfie with the phone. Not long after, the earthquake happened, and he took a picture of Momo, who was caught up in the tsunami. This was why he couldn't take pictures of people anymore. Not only could he not save the girl, but his uselessness has been there for quite a long time. The next day, they headed out to go and see Shuzo, who was in the hospital. Kuya continued his story about Eddie Adams, a photographer who took a picture of an officer executing a criminal. It received a reward, but Eddie rejected it because he felt the photo didn't tell the whole story about what happened. They got to the hospital and met Shuzo's family, who were about to rip Kuya apart. It's not like they had any use and attempted to save Momo either. Haruka defended him, and Shuzo showed him the picture he had taken of them on a phone all those years ago. After some time, Shuzo died, and Kuya attended the funeral. With that done, he and Haruka returned to Tokyo. Haruka returned back home, and informed Futoshi and Kotaro that he had turned down Belsariso's offer. He said that he just wanted to reach the winner's podium before deciding if he would go into professional racing or not. Basically, he'll be sticking with the losers instead of finding an easier route to becoming a winner. Back in Koya's house, Saiko came over to see him. For an ex-wife, she's really doing a lot for this guy. Shouldn't they just get back together? She apologized for misunderstanding him all this while and gave thanks to Haruka for explaining things to her. Koya said he wouldn't be taking any job offers until he photographed Haruka on the winner's podium. At the racetracks, Haruka wanted to change his car setup, thanks to the experience he got from racing with Belsariso. Tokumaru, on the other hand, was having an off day with his racing. So much for being the #1 driver. Meanwhile, Alice was at the hospital, helping with Harunaga's recovery training. Either his recovery would go well, or he'd make things worse for himself. I'd bet on him cracking more ribs, but let's see how this goes. Alice continued to watch him and give her support. At the Kamaki Motors tent, they were sulking because Haruka wasn't able to qualify. He ended up in the 14th position in the qualifying round, thanks to some slowpokes who kept blocking his way. Then again, this little runt might just be making excuses for his lack of skills. Ina came to their tent to show his support and also make some snarky remarks about Haruka. He then asked Haruka to help cheer up Tokumaru, who was sulking like a baby. The fool even offered to let Iwatani go ahead of him and win the first position. Just how sad do you have to be to get to this point? After some time, the racers got onto the tracks. Kotaro came to give Haruka some support as they waited for the race to begin. The lights went out, and the race finally started. Haruka got off to a good start and was blazing past a lot of cars, while Iwatani went ahead of Tokumaru and was leading the race. Tokumaru was really putting pressure on Iwatani because of how slow he was. Then why did he let the guy go ahead of him in the first place? I'm convinced that this guy has some serious brain problems. Iwatani got knocked out of a corner, and Tokumaru took the lead again. Haruka caught up to second place, but his tires started giving up, and he started slipping behind again. Unfortunately, Haruka lost again, and Tokumaru came in first place. The Kamaki team was discussing their last failed race and how having new tires would have definitely secured the win for them. Unfortunately, their so-called sponsor is just a lying, broken man. Haruka then promises to get on the podium next time, so that Kuya can take his long-awaited picture. At the hospital, Harunaga got his cast removed, and it was time for him to start using crutches. The guys from the shopping center showed up at Haruka's garage and offered them some money and sponsorship to help Haruka win a race. Futoshi was rejecting it until he had no choice but to accept it. I can't believe this fat fool was about to give up free money. Thanks to that, they were able to get new tires and change a few consumables as well. Harunaga came back to the Belsarosi tent, and Ina already wanted to put him in a car to start driving. Do these people not have health policies? He got in a car to test out how he would perform. While Haruka was also testing their new tires. After the lap, Harunaga started throwing up in the restroom. He was pretending to be fine when, actually, the dude was literally dying. Once again, why did the hospital even let out this crazy guy? Ina decided that his whole team would race each other to pick their #1 driver in the next race. This was after Harunaga asked to resume his position as their #1 driver. He definitely has a death wish. The Belsarosi team started their competition, and it was mostly a fight between Tokumaru and Harunaga for the top spot. In the end, Tokumaru came out on top.
してると僕が
As the main race was about to start, Saiko called Kaya and told him that she had a job for him to cover a story on F4 racing. Kuya and Seiko are headed to the racetracks as they go over their plans for the day. This time around, it was Seiko who showed up late. On the racetracks, Haruka was having a fun conversation with Harunaga and Tokumaru. The hot-headed Tokumaru finally apologized for his ill behavior towards Haruka all this while. It took him long enough. After that, they raced in the qualifying rounds, and Haruka ended up in 6th place. Belsariso concluded on their drivers, and then Harunaga went to talk to his fangirls. He acknowledged Alice's advice about trying to be like Niki Lauda. This made her go red and have the iconic anime nosebleed. I didn't think it would ever be possible for her. Tokumaru also got his #1 fangirl, finally. Sato met up with Saiko and told her that she had quit working for Mikazuki Beverages. It seems everyone is finally getting some sense in the last minutes of this show. Before the race started, Haruka met with Koya and thanked him for his support. He also told the man how he acts like a nagging mom with his unconditional love. After that, Kotaro went to support Haruka as always before he met up with Alice, and figured his love would be one-sided forever. Poor guy. The race started with Haruka speeding past his opponents as usual. Tokumaru collided with a car and got his wing damaged. With no other choice, he let Harunaga pass him and take the lead. Koya, on the other hand, was hesitating, but Saiko managed to talk some sense into him. Harunaga and Haruka were going at it fiercely on the tracks. Everyone was cheering for Haruka with their hearts in their hands. It was now or never. And, as fate would have it, Haruka won the race.
相手のためなんかじゃない。応援しながら。頑張れ。頑張れ。頑張れ。
Kuya was finally able to take wonderful pictures of him. Haruka made it to the winner's podium, and Kuya fulfilled his promise. That's all, folks. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing content.